Ravik the Hollow had never failed a job. Across 100 star systems, his name was spoken in hushed whispers, a legend among mercenaries and warlords. A shadow that came in the night, a ghost that left no prints. He had taken down warlords, crime lords, diplomats, and even planetary governors, all without a trace. No one saw him coming. No one ever survived to tell the tale. But now, as he stared at the details of his latest contract, something felt wrong. It wasn't the target itself. He had eliminated all kinds, aliens, synthetics, posthumans. But this was a standard human. Daniel crossed no military record. No political ties. No criminal background. Just an ordinary man with a forgettable face and a price on his head that was insultingly high. 100 million sovereign credits. No single bounty had ever reached that number. Even assassinating a prime minister barely fetched 20. It was a ludicrous amount of money for a target who, by all accounts, was insignificant. And yet, here it was, sitting in his encrypted terminal, signed with the highest priority clearance. The client was unknown, nothing unusual, but this one was redacted at the highest level, even beyond Ravik's reach. A trap? Maybe. But even the best traps could be dismantled. He leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming against the sleek black surface of his ship's control panel. The Void Fong, his personal stealth corvette, hovered just outside the orbital lanes of the Sargust 9 trade hub, a neutral system where contracts were exchanged in encrypted dead drops. He had just received his advance, 20 million credits already in his account. Enough to buy an entire fleet. His gut told him to walk away. No job was worth this level of secrecy. But Ravik was a predator and curiosity was a dangerous thing. With a flick of his fingers, he accessed the last known location of his target. Luna Station, an isolated outpost at the edge of the frontier, a place with no surveillance, no witnesses. The perfect hunting ground. He activated the ship's drive, watching as the stars stretched and blurred into the abyss of faster-than-light travel. ####. Luna Station was a graveyard. The moment Ravik stepped off the docking platform, he felt it, the unmistakable weight of silence. Not the quiet hum of a sleeping station, but an engineered silence. Every camera had been disabled. Every automated system had been wiped clean. Even the life support systems were running on backup power. Someone had scrubbed this station of its identity. His target had been here. That much was certain. But the air carried no scent, no lingering warmth of a human presence. Daniel Cross had left no biological trace behind. It was as if the man had never existed. That was impossible. Ravik moved swiftly, his steps soundless against the metal floor. His enhanced optics scanned for anomalies, but there were no bloodstains, no signs of struggle. Just a station left to rot. And then something shifted. His neural implants glitched. A sudden burst of static in his vision, a sharp sting at the base of his skull. His systems locked up for half a second, just long enough for his instincts to flare in alarm. Someone had just hacked him. That's impossible. Ravik had the best cybernetic defenses in the galaxy. His neural firewalls were impenetrable. And yet, someone had just touched his mind, not to harm him, not to disable him, but to warn him. A voice crackled through his private comms. A voice that shouldn't have been there. ****, you should have walked away, assassin ****. It was calm. Almost amused. Ravik's grip tightened around his weapon. And for the first time in his career he realized he wasn't hunting his target. His target was hunting him. Ravik reacted instantly. His combat protocols surged online, neural implants shifting his perception into high-speed calculations. His weapon, a sleek VX-99 pulse pistol, snapped into his grip. His body moved before thought, diving behind cover, a rusted cargo container, just as the station's emergency lights flickered and died. Total blackout. His augmented vision automatically switched to thermal. Nothing. No heat signatures. No movement. And yet he wasn't alone. He felt it. The voice returned, still calm, still unhurried. "I expected you sooner." Ravik's mind raced. This wasn't normal. A target was supposed to run. Targets begged, pleaded, tried to bargain for their lives. They didn't wait for him. They didn't talk like they were in control. This wasn't a man on the run. This was a man laying a trap. "Who are you?" Ravik demanded, his voice cold, controlled. His pistol swept the room, scanning for even the faintest movement. Silence. Then a flicker. Just for a fraction of a second. ****, a heat signature, directly behind him ****. Ravik twisted, firing a precise shot, only for his gun to lock up mid-trigger pull. Weapon malfunction impossible. His systems were flawless. A whisper of air. Movement. Ravik barely twisted in time as something passed through his position like a phantom, sending a pulse of static through his nerves. Not a physical attack. A disruption field ***. They were inside his systems. His entire HUD flickered with lines of code he didn't recognize, his targeting reticles distorted. His augments were state-of-the-art, beyond military grade. No one should have been able to override them remotely. And yet, his entire body was compromised. His only advantage now was instinct. Years of training took over as he abandoned the malfunctioning weapon and moved, launching himself forward in a blur of speed. His combat knife, still analog and unaffected by digital sabotage, slipped into his palm. He slashed out, fast, precise, aiming for where the enemy had been. Nothing. Another voice, this time from behind him. Still relying on old instincts? A whisper of breath. A shift of air pressure. Ravik pivoted at the last second, barely dodging as something brushed against his skin. A presence. A figure moving too fast, too fluid, avoiding him like a phantom in the dark. He couldn't see them. Couldn't hear them. But they were playing with him. That meant they weren't trying to kill him. Not yet. Which meant he still had time to turn the game around. Ravik had been in impossible situations before. He had survived wars, assassinated planetary leaders under maximum security, walked out of ambushes where he was outnumbered 100 to 1. This was just another puzzle to solve. His mind ran through every detail. Who could do this? Even the most elite military forces couldn't shut down his augments remotely. Whoever Daniel Cross was, he had technology far beyond what should exist. That made him more than a human. More than a bounty. He was an anomaly. Ravik slowed his breathing. He let his systems reset, watching for any flicker in his broken vision. If his opponent could manipulate technology, then relying on it would only get him killed. He shut off his enhanced optics. His HUD faded, leaving him in absolute darkness. And then he heard it. The faintest shift of air. A subtle intake of breath. What? He didn't hesitate. He lunged. His blade connected. Just for a split second, just enough to confirm contact. Flesh. A human form. Not an illusion. Not a machine. But the moment he struck, a shockwave of energy blasted him backward, slamming him into the far wall. His knife went spinning into the dark. His body locked up, paralyzed for a full second. Daniel Cross's voice came again, closer now. This time almost amused. You learn quickly. Ravik forced himself to stand, muscles trembling from the residual energy blast. His vision was still scrambled, but he could finally see him. Daniel Cross. He stood at the edge of the shadows, his silhouette sharp against the dim emergency lighting. He wasn't armored. He wasn't armed. And yet, he had just neutralized the most feared assassin in the galaxy without lifting a finger. Ravik exhaled, steadying himself. This was no ordinary man. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he could win. Ravik stood motionless, every instinct screaming at him to act, to attack, to retreat, to do something. And yet, for the first time in his career, he hesitated. Because nothing about this made sense. Daniel Cross stood before him, calm, composed. He wasn't a soldier, not in the traditional sense. No body armor, no visible weapons. He had the stance of a man who had never needed to fight, because he had already won before the battle even began. Ravik forced himself to breathe, muscles coiling as his systems rebooted, slowly purging the foreign interference. Who the hell was this man? Daniel tilted his head slightly, studying him like an experiment. I know you have questions, he said, his voice unnervingly casual. I can answer some of them. But only if you're willing to listen. Ravik's mind raced. Every second spent talking was a second wasted. But Daniel wasn't acting like prey. He wasn't stalling. He was in control. And that meant there was something Ravik didn't understand. Start talking, Ravik growled. Why is the entire galaxy willing to pay a fortune for your head? Daniel smiled, actually smiled as if the question amused him. Because they're afraid, he said simply. Not of me specifically, but of what I represent. Ravik narrowed his eyes. Which is? Daniel exhaled softly, his gaze turning distant. You know how the galaxy sees humans, don't you? He asked. We're adaptable but fragile. Ambitious but insignificant. Useful as workers, soldiers, traders. But never a real threat. Ravik said nothing. He had killed many humans before. Most of them fell into those exact categories. But that's the lie, Ravik. Daniel's voice lowered slightly, carrying an edge of something deeper. That's what they want to believe. Because the truth is a lot more terrifying. Ravik's jaw tightened. He had no patience for philosophy. I don't care about galactic politics. I care about why I was sent to kill you. Daniel let out a quiet chuckle. You were sent to kill me because they couldn't afford to let me walk free. Because if I do. He took a slow step forward, his expression unreadable. Then the secret gets out. Ravik didn't move, but his grip on his remaining blade tightened. He had faced warlords, crime lords and political masterminds, but none of them had spoken like this. What secret? Daniel's eyes met his, and for the first time Ravik saw it, the weight of something ancient behind them. Not fear. Not arrogance. Just certainty. That humans aren't what they seem. Ravik didn't blink. He waited. Daniel sighed. Let me put it this way. The most powerful species in the galaxy, all those sprawling empires and war fleets? They've been watching humans for centuries. Studying us. Keeping us contained. Because they know that the moment we understand what we really are. His smile faded. The galaxy changes forever. Ravik's patience was razor thin. You're talking in riddles? Say what you mean. Daniel held his gaze. And then he spoke one sentence that changed everything. The first race that tried to conquer Earth doesn't exist anymore. A cold silence fell between them. Ravik's mind reeled. He had seen species wiped out before, wars of extermination, planets reduced to nothing. But for an entire race to vanish with no record, no survivors? That was different. That was erasure. Daniel continued, his voice quieter now. They weren't the first. And they won't be the last. Every empire that has ever tried to subjugate humanity has either been destroyed, or erased from history itself. Ravik's blood ran cold. He had always believed he was the predator. The apex killer of the galaxy. But what if he had been blind? What if, in all his years of hunting, he had never seen the real monsters hiding in the dark? And worse, what if he had just walked into their territory? Daniel stepped forward again, his expression unreadable. You were never sent here to kill me, he said. You were sent here to die. Ravik's fingers twitched toward his belt, reaching for a secondary weapon. A last resort. Daniel sighed. Don't. The assassin froze. Because Daniel wasn't threatening him. He was warning him. And that was far, far worse. Ravik had faced death before. He had seen the moment coming, the instant where fate decided whether he lived or vanished into the void. This wasn't that moment. This was something worse. Daniel Cross wasn't bluffing. That much was clear. His words weren't meant to intimidate. They were facts, laid bare with a calm certainty that only someone who had seen the truth could possess. Ravik's mind raced through possibilities, searching for a flaw in the story. It was impossible. If entire species had been wiped from history, someone would have noticed. There would be records, survivors, traces of what had been lost. Unless there was something else at play. Something older. Something deeper. His voice came out colder than ice. Who sent the contract? Daniel tilted his head slightly. You already know. A dozen names flashed through Ravik's mind. The High Sovereigns of the Dominion? The Eternal Consortium? One of the hidden ruling councils that controlled the fate of entire systems? And then the answer struck him with brutal clarity. No, it wasn't any of them. Because they were just as afraid as everyone else. Ravik's jaw clenched. It wasn't a single employer. It was the entire galactic elite. Daniel gave a slow nod. They've been trying to contain the truth for centuries. Sometimes through isolation, sometimes through careful manipulation. And when all else fails, his expression darkened. They send people like you? Ravik had been a weapon his entire life. Sent into the dark, guided by unseen hands, his purpose never questioned. Now, for the first time, he wondered how many of his past kills had been loose ends for the powerful. How many of them had known something they weren't supposed to? He exhaled slowly. They wanted me to fail. Daniel nodded. If you killed me, they win. If you died, they win. Either way, the real secret stays buried. It was almost perfect. Except for one problem. Ravik wasn't dead. And he wasn't going to roll over like some disposable pawn. His instincts flared again, a subtle itch at the back of his mind. Something was still wrong. You said every empire that tried to control humans was destroyed, Ravik said carefully. That means the people who put out the contract, they're not the ones in charge. They're just scared of whoever is. Daniel gave a small smile. Now you're starting to understand. A cold realization settled into Ravik's chest. He had spent years believing he was working for the most powerful beings in the galaxy. That the names whispered in the void, the rulers behind the curtain, were the ultimate force. But now he saw the truth. They weren't the masters of the galaxy. They were prisoners. And humanity was the warden. A warning flare blared in his neural interface. His ship's long-range scanners, set to detect potential threats, had just lit up like a dying star. Something was coming. Multiple somethings. He checked the data feed and his breath stilled. 8 warships inbound. No transponder codes. No faction markings, asterisk asterisk. These weren't bounty hunters. These weren't mercenaries. These were erasure teams. Daniel turned slightly, gazing out into the void as if he already knew. They're here to finish the job. Ravik clenched his fists. He wasn't used to being a target. He was the one who cleaned up messes, not the one being erased. But there was a first time for everything. His options were razor thin. He could still try to kill Daniel, hand over proof of death, and hope that whoever was behind the contract honored the deal. He could do something no one would expect. He could switch sides. Daniel met his gaze, as if sensing the exact moment the thought crossed Ravik's mind. You already know what's coming, he said quietly. And you know you won't survive alone. The assassin exhaled. Then he reached down and reloaded his weapon. Then let's make sure we don't die today. Ravik had always been the one setting the terms, the one dictating the rules of engagement. But now, for the first time, the rules had already been written, long before he ever stepped foot on Lerna Station. And the rules were simple. He was meant to die here. His ship's warning pings intensified. The 8 unidentified warships had entered the system, moving in formation. Not a fleet, an execution squad. They weren't broadcasting demands, weren't attempting to negotiate. Their sole purpose was to erase. A less experienced assassin might have panicked. Ravik did not. His mind clicked into place, shifting into the cold, mechanical focus that had carried him through impossible odds before. The reality of the situation was brutal but clear. He and Daniel were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a station that was already compromised. He had survived worse. Ravik activated a secondary channel on his neural comm, linking directly to his ship's emergency override. The Void Fang had more than stealth capabilities, it had countermeasures, ones he rarely needed but always prepared for. Time to move, Ravik said, his voice all edge. Daniel, still maddeningly calm, didn't argue. He simply nodded. Agreed. As the assassin started towards the exit, Daniel walked beside him, speaking in an almost casual tone. They won't just destroy the station. They'll scan it for residual data, ensure no records of this meeting survive. Ravik already knew that. Then we give them something to find. Daniel raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The two of them moved quickly through the dim corridors of Lerna Station. The emergency lights cast eerie shadows, and every step carried the weight of unseen eyes watching. The whole station felt wrong, as if it had already been condemned long before the warships arrived. Ravik's neural interface updated his tactical display. The enemy fleet was deploying boarding pods, dozens of them launching towards the station like metal fangs. They weren't just erasing the station. They were coming to eliminate him personally, which meant they still saw him as a threat. He tapped into his ship's external comms, rerouting power to a decoy distress signal, broadcasting a faked emergency beacon from the station's opposite side. It wouldn't fool them for long, but it would by seconds, and that was all he needed. The assassin and the Enigma moved with purpose, reaching the outer docking bay where the Void Fang waited in its stealth cradle. The ship's sleek, matte black hull blended perfectly with the darkened station, its systems already primed for a fast departure. Daniel stopped just before they reached the airlock. Ravik turned. Move? Daniel didn't. Instead, he looked at Ravik with a quiet intensity. You understand what this means, don't you? Ravik's patience was razor thin. Explain fast. Daniel exhaled, glancing toward the ceiling as if seeing something Ravik couldn't. The moment you leave with me, you're no longer just a rogue asset. You become an anomaly, a variable in a war that's been fought for longer than you realize. Ravik's fingers flexed at his side. And? Daniel finally looked at him. And that means your real life doesn't start until today. The assassin held his gaze. He had spent years working in the shadows, believing he understood how the galaxy operated. Now he realized he had never truly seen the board. But he was done being a piece on someone else's game. Without another word, he activated the airlock controls, the hatch hissing open. Get in the ship. Daniel gave a small smile, one that was almost approving. Then he stepped inside. Ravik followed, sealing the hatch behind them just as the first boarding pods punched through the station's hull. ###. The Void Fong launched into the void with surgical precision, slipping between the incoming warships before their sensors could fully track its escape trajectory. Ravik piloted in silence, his body a machine of calculated motion. Behind him, Daniel watched the warships adjust course, splitting apart in search of their lost prey. "They won't stop," Daniel said after a moment. Ravik didn't look at him. "Neither will I." Daniel nodded. "Then you're finally asking the right question." For the first time in his life, Ravik wasn't hunting a contract. He was hunting the ones who had sent him to die. And he wouldn't stop until he found them. Ravik had spent his entire life eliminating loose ends. Now he was one. The Void Fong drifted in deep space, its stealth systems engaged, wrapped in the cold embrace of the void. No transponders, no signals, no traceable energy output. To the outside galaxy, it simply did not exist. Just like he soon wouldn't. Daniel Cross stood beside him in the cockpit, arms crossed as he studied the projected star maps. The warships that had come for them were gone now, spread out across the sector, still searching. But Ravik knew the truth, they wouldn't stop looking He had always prided himself on being untouchable. A shadow. A ghost. But now he was being hunted. And not by a single faction, not by a vengeful employer. The entire galactic elite wanted him erased. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "You were never the target, were you?" Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "Not in the way you thought." Ravik exhaled through his nose. Made sense now. This had never been about eliminating one human. This was about luring him into a situation where he couldn't escape. Where the best assassin in the galaxy would simply vanish, just like all the others before him. Because he wasn't the first. And he wouldn't be the last. He studied Daniel, his tactical mind dissecting everything he had learned in the last few hours. This man, if he could even be called that, wasn't a soldier, wasn't a fugitive. He was something else entirely. A living secret. And that meant the people in power would never stop hunting him. Ravik clenched his jaw. "There's only one way out of this." Daniel raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I disappear," Ravik said. "For real. Not just hiding. Not just going dark." He had done that before plenty of times. No, this would have to be absolute erasure. A death so convincing even the ones hunting him would believe it. Daniel didn't react with surprise. He simply nodded, as if he had already known Ravik would reach this conclusion. "You'll need to burn every identity," Daniel said. "Every safe house, every alias. Everything you've ever built." Ravik's lips pressed into a thin line. He had spent decades crafting his legend, embedding himself in the galactic underworld as an untouchable force. Now he had to kill that legend. His fingers danced over the ship's console, pulling up encrypted files, burner accounts, caches of falsified records. Within seconds he began erasing them. One by one. Bank accounts drained. Shadow networks severed. Contact nodes wiped clean. With each deletion, Ravik Hollow ceased to exist. His legacy, his power, his reputation. Gone. Finally, only one file remained. A death record. His own. He entered the command. A moment later, a broadcast signal launched from a distant relay drone, feeding a falsified distress call to every bounty network, every intelligence agency. Assassin Ravik the Hollow, deceased. An accident? A failed escape attempt from Lerna Station. No body recovered. But enough wreckage to make the lie believable. It was done. He sat back, staring at the empty screen. He was no one now. Daniel broke the silence. "How does it feel?" Ravik let out a slow breath. "Like the start of something worse." A small smirk touched Daniel's lips. "Good. That means you're ready?" Ravik turned to face him. "Ready for what?" Daniel's gaze darkened. "For the ones who are really pulling the strings?" Because if the galactic elite feared Daniel Cross enough to erase anyone who came close, then there was something bigger lurking in the dark, And Ravik was going to find out exactly what it was. Even if it killed him.